Okay, so we are on 1623, is that correct? So the translation reads, "He who discards scriptural injunctions and acts according to his own whims attains neither perfection nor happiness nor the supreme destination." So responsively, he who discards scriptural injunctions and acts according to his own whims attains neither perfection nor happiness nor the supreme destination. So here's Prabhupada's purport. As described before, the Shastra Vidhi, or directions of Shastra, is given to the different castes and orders of human society. Everyone is expected to follow these rules and regulations. If one does not follow them and acts whimsically according to lust, greed, and desire, then he never will be perfect in his life. In other words, a man may theoretically know all these things, but if he does not apply them in his own life, then he is to be known as the lowest of mankind. In the human form of life, a living entity is expected to be sane and to follow regulations giving for elevating his life to the highest platform. But if he does not follow them, then he degrades himself. But even if he follows rules and regulations and moral principles and ultimately does not come to the stage of understanding the Supreme Lord, then all his knowledge becomes spoiled. And even if he accepts the existence of God, if he does not engage himself in the service of the Lord, his attempts are spoiled. Therefore, one should gradually raise himself to the platform of Krishna consciousness and devotional service. It is then and there that he can attain the highest perfectional stage and not otherwise. The word kama karata is very significant. A person who knowingly violates the rules acts in lust. He knows that this is forbidden, but still he acts. This is called acting whimsically. He knows that this should not be done, and still he knows that this should be done, and still he does not do it. Therefore, he is called whimsical. Such persons are destined to be condemned by the Supreme Lord. Such persons cannot have the perfection which is meant for the human life. The human life is especially meant for purifying one's existence, and one who does not follow the rules and regulations cannot purify himself, nor can he attain the real stage of happiness. As I'm sure you all probably recognize by now, I'm a little bit sick. And all kinds of fun green stuff is coming out. So we'll try to bear with it here, and I've got a froggy voice, but we'll try to work through it all. This chapter is called Divine and Demoniac Natures, and so it compares the nature of someone divine to the nature of someone demoniac. And in this day and age that we live now, people are lost in symbols and in outward appearances. Normally, a person has an outward appearance of something, or is connected with some symbols, then usually that person is accepted as what its outward appearance appears to be. But someone who's intelligent would actually do better to understand qualities, to look beyond the external appearances, beyond the external symbols, and see what symptoms or qualities a person has. So this is my biggest sort of pet peeve with modern religion, and that is that people are totally lost in symbols and lost in the way people have some external way of judging something without understanding real qualities. Excuse me. So if a person is genuinely on a spiritual path, there should be some litmus test. There should be some benchmark. There should be some qualifications that we should perceive in such a person. It should not be that person who is involved in some spiritual process just simply wears a certain outfit or speaks a certain way or has some degree from a divinity school or something like that. There should be some genuine qualification or quality, because we hear over and over again in the Vedic literature that by controlling the way we think, then we also control the way we speak and act. And if we control the way we speak and act, then we become visibly a different kind of person. Not just about affectations or speech patterns or being a member of some organization. A couple of days ago, I was interviewing Bhagavad-gita Swami, and he was talking about his thesis that he wrote on kleptocracy. I'd never even heard the word before. And of course, a kleptocracy is a rule by thieves.
Oh, wow.
So, and this pretty much describes our world in many parts of it. Of course, he started off by, describing kleptocracy in Nigeria, and then he, gave several other papers on it in other places, And this is what we see, that people are supposed to be leaders of some ilk or another. They're supposed to be government leaders. They're supposed to be leaders of some kind of, moral group, or they're supposed to be leaders of some kind of commonwealth association that helps people to work together to some goal. And then what's actually happening is that they're looking for some loophole to pull out a few dollar bills as they whiz by on some conveyor belt going from one place to some other place that they're supposed to wind up. So this is called kleptocracy, where people who are doing something for the public good, managing some organization, siphon off funds to their own benefit and care not at all about what the real purpose of the organization is. And of course, this happens in government. It happens none too infrequently in corporations in our modern world. This is happening everywhere. And so if a person has actually accepted some spiritual process, then such a person should not exhibit this tendency to siphon money off or siphon off some kind of resources when they get put in a position of power or a position of organization. Abraham Lincoln once said that most people can bear up under difficult circumstances when there's not a lot of resources and they're in poverty or in extremely impoverished circumstances. But if you really want to know the character of someone, give them power, put them in a position where they manage resources or they manage some kind of situation, and then we see what they're really made of, because at that point, what really matters is how much you can control yourself. if you can't control yourself, then it's going to be quite obvious very soon that you are going to be pocketing some of what comes within your reach, if not all of what's coming within your reach. And this happens in all kinds of organizations, including religious organizations. So this is the problem of insufficient purification. So if purification is actually working, then this kind of thing should not occur. But if purification is only external or partial, then certainly, yes, it might occur. Oh, good, I've got more stuff to get all drippy here. So this is the problem of the modern world. So when we hear discourses like this one, we hear from Bhagavad-gita or we hear from some other literature, the first issue is to remember what we hear. If you don't remember it, it's kind of like, what's the point? And the second issue then is to apply what you hear. So the first issue is to remember, and the second issue is to apply. It's not some kind of parlor game or some mental chess, and it's not some kind of memorization, spelling bee or something like that. We are trying to remember for purpose. So once we remember something, we can apply it. And when we apply it, then you get realization. So understanding principles is the first part, remembering them is the second part, and then applying them is the third part. And when you apply them, then you get the fourth part, which is realization. You begin to realize that this isn't just some mumbo-jumbo from a previous era, ensconced in some archaic language. This is the absolute truth. And it describes the way the world actually is. And if we try to understand it, and we try to employ the techniques and ideas that we're learning, then we discover that something should be changing. Our consciousness should be being purified, and we should become detached from material considerations, and we then become focused on spiritual life and the purification that comes with it. So such a person should be visibly different than other people. They should be more self-controlled. They should be able to withstand temptation, and they should be someone who understands the method of purification, how we can stay in a habit of purification, not just do it once in a while, but kind of stay in a daily and constant habit of self-purification. Because by little drops of purification all the time, we make great progress over a longer duration. So the other day on the B7 bus, as I was traveling down Saratoga Avenue, I ran across some school, I don't know what it was, and they had this motto out front, which I thought was really appropriate. It said, be careful with thoughts, because thoughts become words. Be careful with words, because words become actions. Be careful with actions, because actions become habits. And be careful with habits, because habits become character. And be careful with character, because character becomes destiny. So you begin to see how these things, this is really it, that be careful with words or thoughts because they become words. Be careful with words because they become actions. Be careful with actions because they become habits. Be careful with habits because they become character. And be careful with character because character becomes destiny. So by doing things a certain way, we are creating the future for ourselves. Destiny is not something that is dumped on us by some external force. As a famous quote in Shakespeare, the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves, So the stars are the printout of what faults we've had in the past and what we are prone to, but it's not that we're being tossed about in some helter-skelter hurricane of a reality that is capricious and cares not for us, that we had our hand in it. As I always point out, that when the UPS truck delivers your bad karma, you can look and see your own signature on the lading slip that's on the package. You signed for it. You asked for it to come. It was you and no one else. Or as one devotee musician that I know wrote a song, the cause of ruin is your own doing. So we are ourselves to blame for the situation we're in. And when we squarely think like that, then we don't point the finger at anyone else, and we get busy about the real business of life, which is purifying ourselves. And that's done by drops, and it's done not just once in a while, but we are trying to gradually culture a habit of constant self-purification, of walking uphill as much as possible, as much of the time, understanding what we should be doing, trying to remember that, and then trying to implement that. If we do those things, we understand, remember, and implement, then our lives will change. Otherwise, you can know these things and forget them or not apply them or misapply them, and you will not get the benefit of the purification that comes from misapplied or non-applied spiritual life. As it's said, I've heard it a number of times in Christian circles, that it's not that Christianity has been tried and found wanting, but rather it has scarcely been tried at all. So it's just the lack of application that makes things not really work. And again, we have the litmus of if someone is actually changing in their character, then we know that the process is really working. And so if it's not, if we're not experience any kind of internal change, then we know something, the clutch is not in somewhere. There's some kind of loose motion. We're not following something. Because by application of spiritual life, we get realization. So I'm going to stop with that much and ask if there's any feedback or questions. Yeah.
What happens if people are engaged in devotional service, but in their daily life they break the rules?
But what?
But in their daily life they break the rules, the scriptural rules that they're aware of.
Well, this is all a part of a larger picture. We have come from some kind of karmic background. Some people have come from a darker karmic background than others. And so some may have more difficulty at coming to the mark or culturing certain good qualities. But my own personal experience is that although some people may have better manners or something like that, they may also at the same time have deeper vices. And sometimes people with cruder manners might have lighter vices. So it's not easy to tell. And the process of purification is kind of like crawling on your belly through the mud under barbed wire with bullets flying over your head. It's just, there's only one thing to do. You have to go forward. You can't go back. And there's nowhere to go anyways. And we just have to keep going forward come hell or high water. And if we recognize that we are wanting, then we have to make an effort to rectify or to come to the mark in some kind of way, you know. And yes, if anyone is honest, actually that's one of the, I think, most important aspects of spiritual life is, you know, being progressive, proactive, and honest at the same time. Anyone that's honest will know that the more you learn about spiritual life, the farther you'll realize you're away from it. You know, it's like I've said it before, that it's like walking towards a huge mountain. You actually are getting closer to the mountain, but as you get closer to it, you realize it's much bigger than it looked when you were far away. So there's this kind of paradox there that you actually are making progress, but as you get progress, you also are purified and you begin to become aware of the magnitude of the task at hand. It's not as small as it appeared in the very first brush. So you really have to just keep going, come whatever may. But if we are trying to apply, especially the chanting process, what did Bhakti Vasudev had a really cute term for this, you know, sonic, what is it?
Sonic therapeutics.
Yeah, sonic therapeutics. His accent just threw me off for a long time. It took me a while to kind of cotton on to that, you know. He says it, things in ways like, what is he talking about? Oh, therapeutics or something. He has this Nigerian accent that's kind of hard to follow sometimes. But yeah, sonic therapeutics. So
intervention.
Yeah, sonic therapeutic intervention, right? And he writes papers about this, you know, sonic therapeutic intervention to the Bureau of Money Laundering and Statistics or something like that. These are real, you know, peer-reviewed journals, the Journal of Money Laundering, and so we can see that you know, the world is looking for some serious stopgap, or not even stopgap, some serious remedies for some of the things that people generally experience all the time. This is going on everywhere, in government and in industry, in religion, in any other organizations. So through the chanting process, if we try to hear, this is what has the most bang for the buck. You know, if we make an effort to really focus in on the chanting process, we will discover that purifies us more than anything else. So, for some people, the process into Krishna consciousness or spiritual life is kind of a gradual, slow elevation. For a very, very few people, it's a quick elevation. And for some people, it's the whole zigzag thing, where you go in and out, back and forth, back and forth. Usually the zigzag business happens when people are making offenses, or they have a doubtful or suspicious mentality, or they intermittently apply themselves to the process of spiritual life. That's what causes the zigzag business. But even if you're zigzagging, you still have to go and, you know, make those zigzags go further and further up, rather than, you know, being back and forth with no real net gain. So the process is like that. that we have to keep moving forward. Other questions or comments or realizations? Yeah, carry.
So I guess it's like I'm gonna reveal my mind, I guess.
Okay.
Or and see if you have any advice. So on the offenses part, I think, I don't know, like, so we're in the process of chanting and serving and following the principles. And then I realized recently I get sick a lot, and I, like, physically my body. And I started thinking, oh, maybe I'm committing an offense. Maybe I'm not chanting properly. Maybe when I spoke to that person I was offensive, and that's a reaction. And I get into this whole rabbit hole of like, what's happening? Like, did I misspeak, or did I speak badly, or should I not have said that? And then I get into the whole guilt, I'm feeling super guilty. So I guess how to move forward with the process, and because I feel like when I get into that state of mind, it becomes an obstacle to moving forward with the process.
Well, I think they're in the very beginning of spiritual life. I've seen this over and over again. I went through a stage like this too, where Krishna consciousness seems at first something like some kind of white voodoo or something like that, where you look for hidden, ghosts and, items like this, that tiny things that might have thrown everything off. Usually when you make an offense, you have. And usually you can trace to what kind of offense it was, We will go through purification anyways. The Supreme Lord has his way of purifying all of us. And for some of us it's health issues, for some of us it's legal issues, for some of us it's financial issues, for some of us it's emotional or social issues, etc., etc. And so this nice, tasty purification is something that's happening to separate us from this feeling like, things are going nicely in the material world. When things are going nicely in the material world, you should be very suspicious. Either you're finding one of those rare moments where the material world kind of lines up with some kind of a strange virtue and focus, which doesn't happen very often, or else you are fooling yourself in some real serious way, So the material world is kind of always militating against us in various ways. It's always trying to torture us in various kinds of ways. And through this, we are convinced that this place is not our home, never was, and never will be. There is a place where we do belong. There is a place where we're really at home, but it isn't here. And so a good way to think is just to think, all right, let me see if there's anything obvious that I've done. If I can't think of anything, then just, it may be that these three modes of nature are harassing me, to keep me on my toes, to make me call out feelingly to the Supreme Lord. Queen Kunti, says that, my dear Lord, you are the property of the materially exhausted. That those who are somehow doing nicely in the material world cannot call out to the Supreme Lord feelingly. And usually we don't have to work very hard to get adversity to come our way. And there's plenty of that, usually without any external effort. So we don't have to amplify it, but it will come on its own. And through that, we know that we are being chastened and bumped up a notch in spiritual life. We are learning something. Everything is teaching us something. And as we look for the lesson, we are getting deep realization of what exactly is going on in our lives, what's going on here, and what we should change. And through that, we become stronger to not only help ourselves, but if we're really serious, then we should try to help others. And through our own suffering and our own issues, we have the tools to help others. We gain the tools to help others.
Could you explain that a little?
Yeah.
Like by our own suffering.
Because anytime you suffer for whatever reason, even if you do something idiotic and you get whacked, for doing something idiotic, still that suffering burns off some bad karma. And still you get a little bit of clarity. So the more difficulty you go through, the easier it is to be on a clear platform. When you're bubbling around, as one devotee put it one time, when things are happy and fluffy, at that time it's easy to kind of get lost in this goo of material, complacent well-being, which is actually our enemy. It just means that we are asleep at the wheel, basically. And sometimes, if it doesn't mean that we have to look for adversity, but if we've got a clear path ahead of us, then we should use it to walk fast and to make progress. And on the other side of the coin, if we've got all kinds of obstacles, then okay, we have to slow down and meet and respond in kind to all those obstacles. But we will necessarily move more slowly, but we will be making a lot of progress. So everything is happening for a reason, and we may not know that reason now, but at some point, usually, the reason why things happen to us is going to be revealed. Yes, Ken?
You talked about some people making advancement quickly, some slowly, some zigzagging.
Yeah.
What role does karma play in that, as opposed to the role of degree of surrender?
Degree of surrender trumps everything. We can have hideously bad past karma, but if we're very focused and intense on spiritual life, we can make incredibly rapid progress. For the middle of the roaders, which is most of us, we discover that our past usually helps us in some ways and sets us back in other ways. So people who are more mode of goodness, they have certain problems. And people who are more mode of passion or ignorance, they have other different problems. When you're down in the modes of passion and even ignorance, then your life is pretty broken. And you may have the impetus to really work hard at spiritual life. So in one sense, it's a good thing if you actually do work hard at spiritual life. If not, then you've got a lot to work out, On the other side of the coin, if you coming from a good karmic background, then you don't have so much to work out, but the tendency towards complacency or just some kind of positive, ritualistic material happiness is the bog that you tend to fall into. Even though you don't have as much to work out, the tendency is not to be as serious and not to actually overcome much because you feel that things are not really that bad, and that just keeping a kind of middle ground with doing just enough so that you enjoy repeated blessings of the good karma that you're engaged in, but you're not really serious. So there is a serious hill to overcome. Those of us who have had seriously sinful past lives will find that we have trouble believing spiritual life. We have trouble practicing spiritual life and staying on not being intermittent with it. Those with a lot of sinful life in their past will find that they find themselves skeptical. And these are all indications that a person has been quite, sinful in the past. But it doesn't matter if we have been sinful or not. If we just continue to keep going, we will eventually blow through it. Because through repeated application of Krishna consciousness, it burns through all the various strange types of obstacles that we can encounter in the spiritual journey. And there are legions of bizarre obstacles that you encounter in the spiritual journey, but just chanting and staying with the process burns through them all. And the more serious you are, understanding what you're doing, applying what you're doing, being mindful, actually, because it's easy to get in a sort of automatic pilot, ritualistic mindset. Okay, now we're chanting something, now we're reading something. What am I reading? Why am I reading this? What are they talking about? Can I remember it? Will I apply it? And when we make an effort to turn off the automatic pilot, the more we do that, the faster we make rapid progress. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
Is it too cold for you?
No. This chapter explains, of course, or this verse explains this simple fact that if we don't apply ourselves to spiritual principles, they may be there, we may have the effect of them being around us, but if we don't apply them, then we won't make any real progress. We will simply just kind of stay where we are, and we may even backslide to a certain extent. Of course, if someone has at one time made a serious commitment to Krishna, to God, then you can bet that Krishna won't let you sit in the lukewarm world of half-baked spiritual life for very long. Eventually turn the heat up on you, and then you'll come out of it and have to do something about it. So that's at least one genuine thing, or one actual good thing. Of course, it's much less painful to just voluntarily keep pushing rather than wait for Krishna's special mercy that he bestows on the laggards. It's not so fun that way. But if you want to go that route, it's there. This process is being described here, that we're comparing divine and demonic qualities, and some of the divine qualities are listed here, and they are fearlessness, purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, austerity, simplicity, non-violence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault-finding, compassion for all living entities, freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, freedom from envy and the passion for honor. So these are hallmarks or characteristics of people who have made some progress in spiritual life. So what are the demoniac qualities like? Ignorance of what is to be done or not to be done, non-cleanliness, erratic behavior, not truthful, thinking that the world is unreal, there is no God, atheism, that the world is based on lust and sex only. There's constant planning for unbeneficial, horrible works that will destroy the world. being conceited, prideful, having always a large sense of false ego or false prestige, attraction to the impermanent, fundamental firm belief that to make the senses immediately happy is the prime necessity of human life. So these are the contrasting qualities. So if we look, then we can see with this chapter, Divine and Demoniac Natures, which nature we have. Of course, Arjuna is told by Krishna that he has divine nature. So Krishna reassures him. For us, it's not so clear. We have a smattering of both, demoniac and divine natures. So we have to make an effort to upgrade and to fortify our divine side and to try to eliminate our more demoniac side. So just by performing Krishna consciousness, just by doing the daily sadhana or everyday activity that is a part of the spiritual process, we will make progress. But we will make faster progress if we also at the same time try to root out some of the demoniac tendencies. So both things are there. By rooting out the demoniac tendencies, we will make faster progress in our sadhana. And by just doing our sadhana more intensely, we will find it's easier to root out our demoniac tendencies. So it works either way. You can grab hold on either side, and it'll have the same effect. So, yeah, you have a question?
On this point about rooting things out,
yeah.
You said like for us to root it out, is it being aware of it and then praying to Krishna to take it away, or does Krishna take it away without our knowing, little by little? Or?
Well, he does that too, but again, the more conscious you can be and the more you can work from both sides of the equation, the quicker things will go.
Saying I have this problem, or I realize that sometimes people aren't even aware of it.
Right, some people aren't aware. But if we make an effort to recognize our own issues and we try to overcome them, then we'll find that we'll make quicker progress. And so sometimes some of the most revealing times is when somebody's angry at you and tells you what they don't like about you. That's a wonderful time to learn the things that you would otherwise never actually hear spoken. Of course, occasionally they might be inaccurate, but that's kind of a golden time. Generally at that time, that's when we become the most defensive and the most most in denial of what they may be saying. But it may actually be something we really need to hear. And so if we can just sort of sit on the defensive nature and just think, well, they're telling me something and they're angry at me, so they're not pulling any punches. Maybe this is real, and no one else would tell me this because they think they would hurt my feelings or it would be thought of as an offense. But here is somebody who doesn't care whether it's an offense or not. So now I'm hearing, point blank, so sometimes it's a good time. And we do have control of our behavior, so we're trying to analyze, understand, and to change our behavior in such a way that we will take the direction towards the divine qualities and kind of move out away from the direction of the demoniac qualities. And so when we see demoniac qualities, we can think, I don't want to be part of these. I want to try to root these out, to undo these in my life. Of course, to some extent, it will happen automatically. But at the same time, if we can be aware of it overtly, then it'll happen faster. Yeah, you have a question. You're just barely over the hum of this air conditioner.
Sorry, the list that you just read of the divine and the demoniac qualities, where?
They're in this chapter.
So it's listed
Yeah.
out, or is it certain verses?
Yeah, there's I forget which verse it is that lists out the divine qualities, because basically this chapter is mostly about the demoniac qualities, because pretty much the entire Bhagavad-gita is not explaining demoniac qualities, it's explaining divine qualities. So therefore, we're hearing the divine qualities just to give us a foundation, and then we go on to the demoniac qualities. And
It's one,
first
two,
verse.
three. 1 through
yeah, it's 1.1 through 3, yeah. 16.1.3. 1 through 3, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, fearlessness, purification, one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of the Vedas, austerity, simplicity, nonviolence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fall, finding compassion for all living entities, freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, freedom from envy and from the passion for honor. These are transcendental qualities, O son of Bharat, belong to godly men endowed with divine nature. So Krishna just kind of starts off with that, and that gives us a baseline. So when we hear about the demoniac qualities, we can compare them. And actually, this is a good way to understand anything, by understanding it from both sides, the positive and negative, the do's and don'ts. And sometimes we can understand a virtue easier by understanding its corresponding vice, and, of course, in the demoniac qualities, here is, they're listed pretty much right after that with verse 4 and 5. And then, of course, there's that famous demoniac soliloquy that Krishna describes in verse 16.13 to 15. The demoniac person thinks, so much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future more and more. He is my enemy, and I have killed him. And my other enemies will also be killed. I am the Lord of everything. I am an enjoyer. I am perfect, powerful, and happy. I am the richest man. Surrounded by aristocratic relatives, there is none so powerful and happy as I am. I shall perform sacrifices. I shall give some charity. And thus I shall rejoice. So it's kind of theatrical, but this is, the way that the demoniac people generally think, So if you are thinking in this way, then you know that you are trying to, you have to kind of change the way of looking at the world. So the previous chapter to this chapter was the banyan tree chapter, which was chapter 15, sometimes called Purushottam Yoga chapter, or the Yoga of the Supreme Person. And the banyan tree was this material world where there's this tangled tree that has roots going up and roots going down, and there are people going up and people going down. And there are leaves, and it's dense, and no one knows where it starts or where it ends. So this banyan tree is the material world. And so those going up, we call them divine. And those who are going down, we call them demoniac. So that's how this 16th chapter is a segue or a follow-on to the previous chapter, the 15th chapter. So this idea of God being unreal is the hallmark of demoniac people. So the demonic nature has really two pillars. One of them is that there is no God, and the other pillar is that matter is where it's at. That's what we have to get, is more matter, bigger matter, better matter, nicer matter, tastier matter. We have to work at getting that. That's where it's at. And so we see that, in the world around us, everywhere, in so many places. So, any other questions or realizations about this chapter?
I have a question, Lars.
Yeah.
Ken does too. It's about, one of the qualities you said, compassion for others. So if you try to do something to help others, does that also kind of speed up the bad karma element or the negative?
If you do something to help others, what?
Well, I mean, if you try to do some devotional service that's geared toward, preaching or helping others, get the shelter of Krishna somehow. Mm-hmm. Does that also affect or speed up the process for you to...
Yeah, definitely it does. And of course that also falls under the heading of the important principle that even modern people realize of no good deed ever goes unpunished. That whenever you try to help others, be aware that rather than being thanked or glorified or anything, that it's you could find the other thing, that you will find things even more difficult. We have so many examples. Of course, Jesus Christ, and we have Hare Thakur, and all the great acharyas. Whenever they try to help others, immediately they discover that their path is beset with thorns, and but through that, we are actually, benefited, and others are benefited as well, because there's no other thing to do. That's the best way to make spiritual progress, is try to help others to make spiritual progress. So if you try to help others make spiritual progress, you will discover it'll be difficult and confusing and sometimes ambivalent, and you'll get all kinds of issues, but that struggle to help others become Krishna conscious will purify you more quickly than anything else. Yeah.
Hare Krishna. Just a question on what you were just saying. What happens, for example, at work, I play the mantra on my computer. So a lot of times the people who are sitting next to me, it's gotten to a point where, that's the only thing you listen to. You don't listen to anything else.
Right.
I try to explain to them certain things, this is more beneficial. In the end, when we're both in the spirit world together, you'll thank me. I'm trying to
to
understand in a sense. But what happens if they create offenses that they don't realize is that go on me because I'm the one who's introducing them to Krishna, or in a sense, because I don't think they really know what they're saying or what they're...
You may have to back off, because that's just the world we live in, that sometimes you certainly can't enforce spiritual life on anyone, nor can you lead a horse to water and have them drink if they don't want to. So you have to kind of be aware of that principle. And
it's only on my computer, but I deal with people a lot, so that keeps me very...
But does the sound spill over into the ambient?
Well, because the next person is next to me, so it's we both can't play music at the same time, so I get in earlier than her.
Oh, I see.
Put on my computer the mantra first, but I just don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to make offenses, or I don't want it to be offensive in a sense or whatever.
So you don't have some other device that you can listen to that?
No, because it has to be on the computer, because I work on the computer and I talk to people. So it's low. It's not like loud.
I see.
The person next to me would hear it, and they're used to, they're younger. They're used to hearing different
Right.
type of music.
All the
so
good
it's
stuff.
been about 7 months now, 8 months. So they're just like
right.
nothing else that you and it's different mantras. It's not the same one, but
yeah, right.
it's just Krishna music because I know that will sustain me through the day.
Yeah, right. Right. So we're being purified, but others may not be so appreciative of that. So generally I find that, well, of course, the trickier thing is always when you're with people on a regular basis. That's more tricky than other situations. You can chant on the subway or, have something playing out in the open, but people are just walking by and then they're gone, But when you're with someone because you work with them or you live with them, then it's a whole different story. You have to really be careful not to develop bad rasas, that's a sort of a tricky thing to do. And sometimes you may have to do things in a different way just so that you avoid developing negative rasas with people that you spend a lot of time with. Kind of knowing where they're at and knowing that you can only go so far with them, and that's it.
It's a little dangerous because if she's not listening to the music, then someone will have the music on.
Right, someone else will.
Which is
right.
Gonna be very materialistic. It's a little difficult.
But you can't play music on your phone and have the earplugs.
Yeah, you gotta have
because you're in the front desk, so everything
Oh,
is supposed to be off. And it's very low because you have to.
Right.
So it's very, very low.
Yeah.
But ever since I've been working there,
You're like a receptionist or something like that?
Yeah, something to that effect. It just helps me deal with people because everybody comes in with different attitudes, different situations, different issues. So it kind of keeps me very mellow, or, understanding of whatever they're coming to me with. Whatever.
Well, I can really see why you would need to do that.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine. I really have a lot of feeling for people who have to deal with the public on a regular basis, especially these days, where people just at the drop of a hat can rant and get into a whole steam project, and can be kind of ugly sometimes. All right, so maybe we should just rocket into it. Govind came, yeah. Where is he? Oh, he's snuggled in the back there somewhere. Yeah. My voice is kind of gone at this point.